Первая сессия посвящена
And the first session is dedicated to the megatrends in this pandemics. What changes are being brought to the world economy? With us, Marc will share, the General Director of the committee.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm very glad to see all of you. Today we have an important discussion on the post-pandemic and the new megatrends of development. And I have the honor to welcome Marc, who is a famous French economist, executive director of the Reinventing Bretton Woods Committee. And I'm also happy to welcome our major discussant, Mr. Raufhon SALAHODJAEV, who is representing Uzbekistan, and he is also advisor to Uzbekistan government, to several international institutions, and he is also lecturer at Westminster University. So we are starting on the major discussion on how the post-pandemic world has changed everything we did, and what are the new megatrends, actually, what pandemic brings to us. Dear Marc, dear Raufhon, I hope you are already here. Can you hear us? Rauf, are you with us?
Yes, I do.
And Marc?
Yes, good morning. Yes, I am here.
Hello, Marc. Hello, Rauf. So happy to see you. And Marc, if I may, I would like to start with you.
Sure.
It's already been more than a year. We haven't seen each other in person. However, we actually started to talk more and to use different platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. We have even more communications than a year before. It's so even we cannot meet each other, we still connecting with different platforms. And I think that this is a real change in technology, and all the technological sector has been accelerated with the pandemic. And the major technologies are still at the advanced countries. And I want to ask you following. Before we start with the major theme on the megatrends, I want to ask you about your feeling on emerging markets. Before, we used to think that emerging markets will become more and more developed, and the gap between developing and developed world will become much smaller. What do you think, how the pandemic effect has changed it, or it's still possible?
Thank you, Maxat, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Let me first thank you for the invitation to participate to this important forum, and congratulate your endeavor to make this initiative a reality at a time where we, as you said, we cannot meet face to face, but we have the ability, in fact, to continue to interact virtually. As you suggested, we have been living in a world that is becoming more and more virtual. And COVID-19 has just accelerated, this fact that we are going to shift from a world that we were calling, hyper-globalization, a world where emerging markets were the drivers of global growth for the last decade. That was a time where globalization was the main paradigm for the global economy, and that emerging market, as you suggested, were the drivers, and we were feeling that they are going to catch up with the advanced countries. Yesterday, the IMF released its forecast for the global economy. They were quite surprising positive, but the news was that it is positive because the drivers of growth will not be the emerging market anymore. It will be the United States particularly. So clearly, we are going to see here an accelerator and a megatrends, that the fact that the drivers of growth, the emerging market, are going to be suffering for a couple of reasons. And I think one of the reasons that I think is going to be very important for the emerging market world, they are going to be in a world that are going to diverge from advanced to EM, that they will need to find new drivers of growth because they are not going to rely on commodities, they are not going to rely on tourism, and they are going to be very vulnerable to capital flow and capital outflow. And of course, one of the other vulnerabilities is going to be if the US is going to grow quite dramatically, you are going to see an upside on the foreign exchange with the dollar going up that will have a huge impact for the emerging market. And of course, these things can be altered if emerging market as a whole, and of course, it's very difficult to put all the emerging market all together because there is a huge heterogeneity among the emerging economies. I think they will need to really think about, like every countries who are going to learn the lessons of COVID-19, about the role of the state, about their own resilience, about their own supply chain, because they will not want to rely on supply chain coming from China, coming from the US. Everyone is rethinking the role of the state. So you are going to, this is a good moment for the emerging market world to understand what are the comparative advantage, where the concept of globalization is going to shift away to a modified globalization, to a world where nations are going to be back and where the world is going to be driven by more debt, a world that is being driven by the need to generate sustainable growth, and that a world that is going to be, I think, where trade will also be very different. I stop there because I don't want to take too much time, but I will be happy to get back on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc, for the beginning. So let me remind you that Marc is joining us from France, and Rauf is joining us from Uzbekistan, from Tashkent. It's interesting because Marc is joining from Europe, which is a developed part of the world, and Rauf is joining us from Uzbekistan, which is one of the emerging markets. And let me continue with what Marc have mentioned. So what we are witnessing today is that the main part of the world economy, which is mainly represented by US and China, is experiencing a rapid recovery. The US is expected to grow at 5.6%, and China is also impressively recovering. However, the other part of the world, represented by emerging markets and developing countries, is still in the grip of the crisis. Dear Rauf, what do you think are the prospects for emerging markets? So we have heard Marc's view, and I would like to ask you on the prospects of the global economy from your point of view, and mainly for emerging markets like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Central Asia and Caucasus. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your question. And Dr. UZAN is completely right. We see the significant shifts in some paradigms which have existed before. And looking at the developing countries and emerging markets, we can see that they're specifically vulnerable right now to external shocks. If you know, Central Asian countries, along with some other Caucasus countries and Middle East countries, are very significantly dependent on external trade, on commodity prices, on remittances. And we see that major remittant sending countries such as Russia, such as European Union, are also having some difficulties in maintaining stable growth rates. So therefore, the government here and in other neighboring countries has to reconsider what are the drivers of economic growth. In our country, for example, we're specifically paying attention to human capital, to maintaining economic growth model, which is driven inside the country by generating entrepreneurship places, by increasing the supply of financial resources to economy, by investing in education, healthcare, by starting some infrastructure projects. So I think this is one of the sources. The second source would be interaction among countries. I think when we have such a pandemic, when it's very hard to do logistics to maintain some long distance trade partnerships, it's very important for neighboring countries to integrate and to trade more with each other, because this significantly eases the transportation costs, this reduces some transaction costs, and it's easier to maintain such trades. So we're going to see, my opinion, is more integration among the neighboring countries, and the drivers of economic growth would be found inside countries themselves. So it's going to be more internally driven economic growth in our countries. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Ralph. What I found interesting is that the emerging markets are still using some traditional methods of growth and interaction with each other, like integration. However, the other part of the world, what we see the effect of pandemic is that the huge growth of technology companies and the green technologies. And today there is a sense that alternative energy has received a powerful impetus for growth. And Marc, do you think these are the major megatrends, and what, from your view, we have to witness after the pandemic? What will be the major drivers for US, China, and other developed countries?
Thank you, Maxat. Yes, and I think I share what Ralph just said about the fact that global value chain will be different, because yes, you are going to trade among your country is very closer, and already we can see the dynamics between trade between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is already something that was there before the pandemic. I think it's going to accelerate. But broadly, when we think about mega trends in the global economy, in the world today, and how it's going to fit about the growth model for emerging market and for Central Asia, I think it's like, we left the world, and we are not going to come back. This is the world of yesterday. And the world of yesterday was all about austerity. Remember, the whatever it takes, was a concept that former president of the ECB, Mario Draghi, laid out, to make sure that we are going to save the euro. And the whatever it takes today in the global economy was, we need to save lives. We need to save the people. And that's how you saw in advanced countries huge fiscal package, huge fiscal stimulus in the US, in Europe, because we need to save lives. And of course, as a different level, this is also something that's been happening in emerging markets. So that was a big priority. So I think we are seeing a change also, and this is very important, of macroeconomic paradigm. That's, I think, is going to be the underpinnings of a new world where, fiscal policy is now a driver to try to manage macroeconomic policy in advanced countries and hopefully in emerging market, because the fiscal space is limited in emerging market. But the fact that you have in the US this huge stimulus package that is not just providing payment, to deal with the short-term economic outlook. It's about bringing, to shift away from the period of neoliberalism that the US and advanced countries have been, if you wish, working on for the last 2 decades, that everything was about free market, everything was driven by market. Now we want to do one objective, is to fight inequality, is to bring back equity, is to generate sustainable and equitable growth. And this is transformative, not only for the US, but for advanced countries and hopefully for emerging markets. So that's why you are going to see the role of the state that is going to be more important. That's why you are going to live in a world where global governance is going to be very different. We are going to move away from international cooperation as we knew it, where you have the orchestra, the IMF, the international institutions who were behind the machinery of international cooperation, to move to something very different, what I will call the concert of nations. This is a concept that was part of the 19th century, meaning that nations who have something in common, who wants to operate or organizing a project together, are going to sit down and to say, we agree. This is a period where two major superpowers are going to be in a period of competition sometime, like China, US, or cooperation. So every country, we need to adapt to this new paradigm, a paradigm about macroeconomic policy that's going to be very different, where we want to fight inequality to go to more equitable growth under a paradigm of global governance that is going to be different. Should Kazakhstan choose between China or US, or should they don't choose and to be neutral? But at one point, country, we need to make choices. And this is the way we are going to world to live in these new mega trends. You know, clearly, of course, change, automation, need to invest in human capital, need to be more green, need to be more digital, and it's not going to happen overnight. As Rauf said, you know, you need to invest in human capital. You need to shift your growth model to green economy. This is going to attract and need to attract a lot of investment. But this is worthwhile to do that, because this is how you are going to generate growth for emerging market. This is the way you are going to interact with the rest of the world. And I believe that regional institutions are going to be more prominent and more influential in the years to come.
Thank you, Marc. And I fully agree also with Rauf saying that Central Asia should, and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan should have more integration options. Because as Marc said, if Kazakhstan should choose between US or China, so we have also Russia, so it's a lot of things to choose between. So the option should be to choose integration between Central Asia and between the two major economies in the region, like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So I would like to get back to Rauf and asking a question. Last year, during the major part of the pandemic, we were thinking that emerging markets may face a debt crisis, because all the debt is nominated in US dollars, and the currencies of emerging markets are weak. So do you think this is still may happen, or we pass this option?
You're completely right. And there is another issue coming up, which is rising debts of emerging markets. A number of emerging markets across the world had difficulties in maintaining some of their growth prospects and maintaining some of the government expenses. So they started to shift attention towards external financing. And this has become quite a challenge for some countries, which are especially reliant on external trade to generate international revenue, such as commodity exports, remittances. So when you do not have inflow of international dollars into your economy, of course, you might have a challenge of paying the debt. But also what's important, and I wanted to take on Dr. Uzan's point here, is what we see in emerging markets. It's not maybe such a debt problem, but a problem of sustainable development. There are several megatrends which we observe right now. This is the rise in the gender gap, which is, again, the gender gap across the world is becoming wider. And according to United Nations, it might take 30 years additional to what they expected to close the gender gap. So I guess it's right now around 160 years, while they were projecting it to be less. The second point is the rising inequality and poverty across in some nations, which is also going to be driven by pandemic, by a lot of different shifts, megatrends which exist. And the third point, which maybe Dr. Uzan could shed light some more, is deterioration of government institutions in some countries. The pandemic world have shown that in some emerging markets, the government institutions and reforms which were taking place are now degrading and rolling back towards becoming more stricter, towards higher levels of corruption and other institutional disimprovements. So I think those big trends which governments in emerging markets have to tackle, and maybe some regional powers or some big international players have to also take into consideration. It's how we're going to progress towards sustainable development when we have so much uncertainty across economies, across markets, and even across our social issues. Because this pandemic, it's not really economic crisis. This is more of a social, it's more of social technological crisis, which we observe in the terms of medicine, in terms of vaccine development, access to vaccine. So I guess this is going to be much a bigger challenge for emerging markets in a short, midterm perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Rauf. Continuing on sustainable development, I want to ask Marc following. Is inequality becoming wider, and if we should say that it is a major challenge caused by pandemic, do you think inequality will continue to rise? It's of course rose in emerging markets, but do you think it may continue to rise?
Yes, Maxat, just to before answering your questions, just to follow up on Rauf analysis, I totally agree that, you know, like, are we going to be in a lost decade for emerging market? You know, like all the progress made to fight poverty, it's like we go back to square one, you know, because we lost with the pandemic. We saw the shortcomings of bringing, you know, the quality of government that was needed, you know, to bring, you know, support for the people. But also, I think let's be optimistic at one point. I share and I totally agree. Yes, we have a rise. If you look at the world, you know, and in emerging market, yeah, rise of inequality within country and outside country. You know, that's number one. Number two. What this crisis has taught government, financial inclusion is critical. And, you know, if you need to provide a social safety net to people, you realize that providing, you know, cash to people very quickly, you know, technology help a lot. I think you have an example in Kazakhstan where you have some very interesting fintech who were able to provide this type of support from government directly to people. So we are going to see, thanks to technology, you know, an acceleration with financial inclusion, you know. Number three, if we think about, you know, as you said, is a world, let's look at the aftershocks. The aftershocks, we are going to be in a world where we are going to have more public debt all over the world, you know, the huge debt overhang. We are going to be in a world that is going to be more digital and a world that is becoming more with the rise of inequality. But at the same time, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, you have, you know, for the first time in the first, you know, superpower, a shift of paradigm, because a key priority will be to fight inequality. You are going to have spillovers. What's happening in the US, you know, when you have a change of this macroeconomic paradigm will also have an impact for the rest of the world. It's going to be very difficult to think that what you need to bring to people will be politics of austerity. That's not going to be the case. People realize that what we need to do is to first to help our people, to make sure that, you know, everyone will get a vaccine, you know. So the international cooperation will be, we can get out of this crisis if we can vaccinate everyone. So this is a public good for the world, you know. So you are going to see this vaccination diplomacy that's going to be underway. Yes, we are going to be in a world that is going to be driven more by intangible, by services. But at the same time, yeah, as Rauf said at the beginning, human capital is so critical. You need to train people. I look at Central Asia, as I've been traveling there when it was the best of times. You were thinking about, as a driver of growth, it was all about tourism. It was bringing people to come to your countries. It was a Silk Road visa. Remember that. So tourism will be different. It's going to be about the quality of tourism, not about the quantity of people you bring to Central Asia. It's going to be the same thing with the quality of infrastructure. So yes, the big mega trends will be, yes, a world that is unfortunately, inequality will still be there, but I think there is an awareness within the global community that the goal of public policy today is to fight inequality. If you look at the keywords emerging around the world, it's all about equitable, sustainable, inclusive growth. This is going to be the paradigm that is going to drive us for the years to come. So I'm trying to be cautiously optimistic. You have an alignment of all the stakeholders to realize that for the moment we need to serve our people, to serve the people, to make their life better. It's going to be less about, capitalism as we knew it. So I think we see this realignment, and I think it's going to have major consequences. So we are going to have maybe higher taxes, for companies, for the wealthy. So I think it's going to be a redistribution of wealth that is going to happen also in the years to come in various countries.
Thank you, Marc. Thanks so much for the deep discussion. So, and I would like to get back to one of the megatrends of 2019, before the pandemic, the Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, which was the mega changer for the whole region, for Central Asia, for Kazakhstan, for Uzbekistan. And I would like to ask Rauf, so we hopefully are at the end of the pandemic, at least we can see some light. Do you believe that the Belt and Road Initiative will still be the driver for trade, for integration between the region?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I do agree that once pandemic is over, we're going to see this return to normal life, or return to some of our previous plans which have existed. Also, what's important to mention is the Belt and Road region is, although we have some rich countries, less developed countries, the whole region is very thirsty for economic growth. We have a highly populated area. One of the world's biggest share of population is living in the Belt and Road region. And countries such as India, China, Eastern Asian countries, and Central Asia might become some of points of economic growth where investors hungry for higher returns could provide some investment source of income. And again, as Dr. UZAN said correctly, we're going to have a lot of regional integration, and Belt and Road integration is one of the paramount integrations because it encompasses a large set of countries which are densely located in one region. So it's going to be some common infrastructure. We already see and have seen when Belt and Road was initiated, there's going to be railroads, railways, new routes across the Belt and Road countries. And such logistical and infrastructure changes are going to shift significantly and promote economic growth. What's also important is in the post-pandemic world, and what we have seen is the rise of technology. We have seen the technological advancements have become much more rapid when the world have noticed that technology is becoming a very important, not just the source of economic growth, but also the source of maybe survival for some industries and for some enterprises. And Belt and Road region, especially Eastern Asian countries, are very strong in technological development right now. If you consider a lot of innovations, a lot of technological improvements are coming from East Asia. A lot of manufacturing is from East Asia. And you noticed when we had a pandemic lockdown, customers in United States, in European Union had a lot of struggles in doing manufacturer production because a lot of elements were not coming from Eastern Asian countries. So therefore, my comment is Belt and Road region is going to be still very important agenda for countries in this region. And it's going to become even more important because we need to maintain high rates of economic growth to return back to previous levels of economic development. Thanks.
Thank you, Rauf. Marc, do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add about what Rolf was saying about your question about the Belt and Road Initiative. What will be different from what BRI was all about before pandemic and after pandemic? I think, in thinking about the Belt and Road Initiative, you have to think about always these three dimensions. It was all about connectivity. As part of landlocked countries, you need connectivity to the rest of the world. You need to have, access because it was very difficult, transit, between countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is very difficult because due to trade barriers, that needs to be revamped, So connectivity is a big priority for Central Asia. If we have to think about the Belt and Road Initiative and also this, this historical dimension, we need to phrase it now under what I will call the green Belt and Road Initiative. It should be green, that's no brainer. Green, digital, and of course, the driver of connectivity. And behind that, because countries in Central Asia who were promoting the Belt and Road Initiative, who wanted to attract tourism, I think it should be all about the quality of tourism. It's going to be very, very, very important. I think even when we think about what was the driver of growth in Central Asia, you were hit by the trade shock. Central Asia was hit by a commodity shock. And today it was also hit by a tourism shock because we cannot travel. So when you start to think about the next wave and the next step about how we are going to revive our economies, you need to think about the quality of tourism. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative or the Silk Road is still part of you know who you are, as countries. So we need to be anchored differently to showcase to the rest of the world who you are all about. We talk about being nomad. Like if you think about the countries these days, one of the concepts that is emerging post-pandemic, everyone wants to be a nomad. Nomad is all about Kazakhstan. If people believe that they can come to a country, live for 6 months because, they want to be, by themselves, So when you think about conceptually about Belt and Road Initiative, that's a part of your DNA. But I think, it should be all about connectivity, it should be about green, and you make sure that you are not going to increase, your debt level, because a lot of countries like Kyrgyzstan, who have been very worried about the huge amount of debt that they incur with bilateral with China. So that's, I think, what is going to be the concerns, moving forward. And you need to attract private investment. It should not be just, government-driven. A Belt and Road Initiative. It should be private investment. It should be foreign direct investment coming to your countries because they see the potential and they see that the Belt and Road Initiative should be part, as a growth strategy driven by green.
Thank you, Marc. So it will be great to have a Belt and Road more green, more digital, and more sustainable. So I want to ask a few questions from the audience. This is a question for Marc. COVID-19 exposed and in some cases exacerbated existing socio-economic and racial tensions. Most recently with regard to Asian communities around the globe. Do we expect that our society will be able to overcome them and get stronger in post-COVID? So the question is mostly on the pandemic and that it has appeared in China, and it was, some politicians were saying that it is a Chinese virus. So please.
Yes, like if we look at the pandemic and also the polarizations that you have within countries and outside countries. Remember, people say, it's Chinese virus, or you see discrimination against the Asians, particularly in the US over the last few months. I think, the tone is changing. At the same time, you see clearly that now we talk more about diversity. We talk more about inclusion. So you cannot do a conference, you need to bring all the stakeholders within a society. So that's why I think the drivers and the paradigm is shifting. We want to be in a more inclusive society. We want to be in a more equitable society. And they are not just words. This is what I think government, and particularly in the US, is shifting. So yes, we were in a world where we have this few important polarization. Look at what happened in the US before the current Biden administration. You have, a country that holds the value of freedom were able to feel that his symbol of democracy was under attack. Capitol was terrible. And that's why with Biden, it's all about, we are going to be now, we are going to try to move away from this polarization and to create and to generate a more inclusive society. And this is happening in the US. This is also happening in Europe. because we have this change of paradigm. This is, I think, for me, the most, if I have to leave a message here to your audience, Maxat, and for your conference, is that I'm a believer the aftershock of COVID-19 is not about that we are going to live in a world where you have a higher taxation, higher public debt. It's a recognition of politicians all over the world that the purpose of the government is to help and to serve their people. Meaning that we cannot continue to live in a world where you have this huge inequality, that you have this huge polarization, that you have discrimination. Look at the new values that are emerging. It's all about inclusiveness. It's all about, diversity. So that's what we need to grape, and to move on and to take that as a new drivers for making, our societies, more balanced, more equitable. And I think, I'm very optimistic that the winds coming from US will spill over positively to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Marc. I want to sum up our interesting discussion with a question from audience. To both of you, can you briefly sum up the megatrends you think we will face in 2021? And I start with Rauf.
I think the most important megatrends which we're going to observe, as Dr. UZAN said, is the shift in paradigm, not just in terms of economic growth models, but in terms of how we value society as well. We're going to see a higher increase in inclusiveness, the higher attention towards less privileged segments of society. We're going to see greater investment in technologies and higher attention to environmental issues and the rise of investment into technological industries such as renewable sectors, healthcare, innovation, and we're going to see less dependence of countries on commodities and remittances. We're going to see that countries will be shifting attention to a human capital growth driven model. I guess those are going to be some of summaries from my side.
Yes.
Thank you, Rauf. Marc?
Yes, I share totally what Rauf said. I think I would like to add something that we have not discussed yet during this conversation, but I think that's going to be maybe one of the most important mega trends moving forward, which I think will change the way we think. And this is all about the revolution with money. Okay, think about, and that's, I think, we have not yet grasped all the consequences with the fact that we are going to be in a world where money will be very different. We have been living with fiat money, with paper money for the last century, when we have this model about one central bank who has the monopoly to issue money. In a world where you see now all the discussion that central banks are going to issue digital currencies. And it's going to have huge ramifications. Because in a world where you have euro becoming more digital, where the Chinese RMB will be becoming more digital, you are going to have a very different international monetary system. And also, should we think that private companies and private sector might also issue digital money? Think about the Amazon of the world. Within Amazon, well, they can create also a private money to ask their customers to pay with Amazon currency. What's about, which is of course different, Bitcoin. So I think this is also another mega trend that is going to be accelerated in the next 10 years, and we need to pay much more attention because it will raise a lot of questions about monetary sovereignty. Are we going to be still in a world where you have the monopoly of the state issuing money? Or we are going to have this new world where you have, of course, the US dollar within the US, but also a multiplication of private money at the same time. That's going to be one of the key questions also for the global economy, because you see, if every country is starting to issue central bank digital currencies, we will need to think about how they are going to interact, interconnection among these digital money. That's going to be, I believe, also a big mega trend. A part, of course, the trend that we have discussed, We are moving away from hyper-globalization, that's for sure. We are going to be in a world that is becoming more intangible. And I totally agree, human capital will be critical. Generating inclusive growth can be a reality if we train people and we train the young generations to make sure that they will have a great life moving forward.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Rauf. And I would also add one more thing is climate change.
Yes.
And we see that this is becoming the major megatrend, and we see more and more attention on the climate issues. We see that US is back on the Paris agreements and all the technologies in alternative energy and waste management, so becoming more and more important. Thank you, Rauf and Marc, for joining us today for the Nobel Fest. Let me remind you, Marc is Executive Director of the Reinventing Bretton Woods Committee, and Rauf is he is advisor to the government of Uzbekistan and for several international institutions. Thanks for being with us, and we continue with another session on the super apps and on 5G. Thanks so much for being with us, Marc and Rauf.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.